Okay, let's get started. We are thrilled to welcome and thank our sponsors Doodle Labs and DIU for their generous support today. And joining us are three excellent speakers from these companies. We have Matthew Borowski, Technical Program Manager at DIU, Ashish Parikh, the VP of Business Development at Doodle Labs, and Nate Lipka, the Senior Marketing Manager at Doodle Labs. So let me do a quick introduction of each of these three speakers, and then we're going to turn it over for their presentation. So Matthew Borowski currently leads DIU's Blue UAS program, managing several small unmanned aircraft systems development and prototyping programs, while partnering with DoD program offices to adapt and field commercially derived robotics technologies to address critical warfighter needs. Ashish Parikh currently leads sales and operational efforts for Doodle Labs, a leading manufacturer of long-range mesh radios for mobile robotic systems. Parikh heads up Doodle Labs government programs and spearheaded the company's initial collaboration with DIU in the development of the Helix smart radio. And last but not least, Nate Lipka is a member of the Doodle Labs marketing department. He has a background in journalism, corporate communication, and tech industry marketing. So we are clearly in excellent hands today, and we can't wait to hear what you guys have to share. So with that, Nate, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Shannon, and thanks again to AUVSI for hosting this event and making it happen. So Blue, it's generating a lot of interest. Obviously, that's why all of you are here. The program itself is in place to identify, vet, and scale commercial unmanned aerial system technology for the DoD. It really kind of bridges the gap between those groups in the DoD and the creators and manufacturers of drone technology, equipment, and components like Doodle Labs, really with the goal of producing policy-approved technology and making it faster and easier for folks in the DoD to really get their hands on this technology that they want and need to deploy. Some of the results really of the program so far is really an interesting government and defense and commercial collaboration. Obviously, much like this event, bringing together both the public and private sectors has created kind of a blue ecosystem of vendors that are creating solutions that are quite interoperable. And really the most interesting aspect that I think we'll cover today is how Doodle Labs and other vendors have kind of gone beyond the specs and scope of DIU's initial ask for this type of technology. There's really just some really cool stuff in this space, so we'll definitely cover that off. So for the specific session today, we'll get an orientation of kind of the Blue UAS program and the structure, and there's some different layers there from Matthew with DIU. We'll have kind of a group conversation around the collaboration between our two groups and just in general, the public-private kind of partnership. We'll get the full scoop on the Helix smart radio, as was mentioned earlier, as kind of a use case and talk about how that project came to be as a representative of this type of program. We'll branch out into some other exciting tech in the space that's resulted of the program. And we'll project a little bit about the future of the program and this technology and kind of where it's headed. And as mentioned, we'll have a Q&A portion at the end. So please definitely send your questions across for any of us. We'll be happy to kind of field that at the tail end of the session best we can. So I think we should really start with Matt and DIU just to get a feel for where the program started and where it's kind of headed. So thanks again for joining us, Matt. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Nate.
Yeah, could you maybe just start with telling us a little bit about your specific background, kind of your work in the drone space and your role at DIU?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Matthew Borowski. I've been a technical program manager at DIU for getting close to 5 years now. I have been in the Air Force for almost 20 years. The past few decades have been mostly in the reserve capacity. So I would serve as we call it total force concept, but serving primarily in a part-time capacity. But I was recently picked up from DIU to do active duty orders. So now I come to DIU as an active duty officer. My background in the Air Force is in command and control, as well as cyber operations. So that's kind of what I've been trained in. But majority of my time and experience has been in industry. I'm an embedded and control systems engineer. I've done embed development for a number of years. I'm also an entrepreneur. I spun out my own company about 8 years ago. Brought that from a prototype stage to a product that's now in market today. So I brought both those skills with me to DIU, and now I've had the pleasure and luxury of working with our DoD partners, mostly the U.S. Army, on small UAS technologies, helping to get commercially derived SUAS tech from where it lives today into where it needs to be to make a difference in our DoD. And my home base is Boston, so I live in the Northeast. And yeah, that's a bit about me.
That's great. So I think you're obviously well suited with experience on both the government side and on the technology side. So I know you prepared some slides. I think it'd be really helpful to kind of get that full scope view of kind of just the structure of the Blue UAS program, what's involved there. That would be a really great place to start, I think.
Yeah, love to share them with you all. I share them because I like everyone to have kind of a baseline understanding about a topic before we get too into the weeds here. So I'm going to share my slide, and hopefully it shows up without issue. How's that look?
Looks great. Ready to go.
Awesome. So I obviously stole the title from the webinar, but really quick, what is Blue UAS? And Blue UAS is just part of a whole of DoD solution, which is working with commercial vendors, companies, to get technologies into the DoD, and it's become actually part of the broader US government. And the reason I put this slide up is simply because I want to make sure that folks on the webinar know Blue UAS is an umbrella program that encompasses many different efforts. And sometimes it can be hard from the outside looking in about what effort fits under what. And so I'll kind of decompose that just briefly so you guys understand what they are and what framework, where framework lives. But our 5 lines of effort really are shown here. And one of the most prolific DIU efforts, which has been a great success, has been our Blue SUAS, which a lot of folks call Blue UAS. And that is really our systems that have been cleared by the Office of Secretary of Defense for ANS to be used by the US government. But I will say that's just one part of what we do. That's called the cleared list. And then we have an effort that we call the on-ramp, which is what the process that companies go through to get on the cleared list. How we vet them, get the paperwork in place, and get them onto the cleared list goes to what's called the on-ramp. We have an effort called the Foundry, which we work very closely with mostly Army program of record, so program offices currently, to get them their system that they want as part of a requirement they want to fill the material solution for. That's called the Foundry. And then we have our framework effort, which is what we'll talk a lot about today. That really is working on the components, the protocols, the under the hood elements of what makes a small drone successful and compliant. And then we're working on what's called the hub, and that'll be a US government website that folks in the government can go on to grab all this information. It's currently in beta stage, soon to be released, but it will be a government site that will have a lot of our information from companies that we work with will be posted there. And that way it lives somewhere public, or not public, but maybe more available than going through our email inboxes. So these are kind of the projects that you may have heard different topics on. SRR UAS is a pretty high visibility project. I mentioned the clear list on here as well. But just to kind of give you a flavor of how we see things flow, everything really emanates from the commercial market and then flows either through framework, Foundry, or on-ramp. But a lot of these are interconnected. There's a lot of touch points between programs where they all connect and they form a really cohesive strategy. So again, framework, the one right here kind of in the middle, is the one I'm going to spend a lot of time with Ash on. And quick background on framework, it really comes from a need that was a policy that was put on the DoD from Congress called the FY20 NDAA Section 848. Had a lot of language. Anybody can go on there and Google that and find out for yourself, but it did ban systems and components, a list of components that come from the People's Republic of China. And so that was one of our forcing functions. The other one really is DoD requirements. We have things that we do in the DoD with drones that a lot of people don't have the need for, and therefore our systems are a bit unique in that regard. So with that in mind, we looked at the current methods of how we get components for drones. There really are 2 primary ones. There's others as well, of course, but there's 2 primary. The first one really is what we call commercial off-the-shelf parts. These we call the spin of Legos. It's a bunch of stuff out there that you can go buy now from different hobby shops and Amazon and all over the place. They get you from 0 to flight on a budget. The parts are typically pretty high TRL. They focus a lot on open protocols, but a heavy reliance on Chinese supply chains makes them unable to be used for DoD use cases. All the way they've done it with cables and fixtures and housings, that adds weight that we really can't support. This weight equals size equals reduction in maneuver, and they're very DIY feeling. You can make do, but they never have that quite polished feel. Now, on the other side of the fence is really your polished system, and that's where you ask for a system and you get a system. And that means a company is typically doing everything in-house by themselves. Many things they're developing only for their usage, and that can be great. It might give you a great end product, but those components can't be reused across other products. And that means that they're single use or single vendor use. And anytime you want to change that, there can be a pretty high penalty in design, cost, and schedule. And a company typically needs pretty high R&D to get to that level of polished feel. Designs can take years to mature, and we have to work in an environment we may not have years to go from concept to reality. So we need something in the middle. And that really is where framework plays a role. Is it helps us get components that are ready now, form an interoperable framework across them, come from vetted and reliable supply chain and sources, and also allow us to use them across our platforms and leverage economies of scale. So I'm going to show one more slide that kind of talks about who we work with under framework. Many companies you may be familiar with or may have already talked about this before, but we kind of have 4 buckets of categories. I will say on flight controllers, we work very closely with Modal AI on our flight controller, as well as support from Auterion. On data links, we work with DIU and Doodle Labs, who we're talking with today, as well as Modal AI. On cameras, we work with Vantage Robotics, FLIR, Immervision, NextVision, and Obsidian Sensors. And then our software protocols, we work very closely with Auterion, with some help with Open Source Robotics Foundation. And we've also had some really cool software come out of Reveal Technologies. So this is kind of the what we have, and I would encourage anybody to go talk to these companies. And if you want to ask about Blue UAS framework, I'm sure they'd be happy to share. So there's a quick background about Blue UAS, delving into framework, and I hope this helps at least set the ground for the next topics here.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I think it really does. I wanted to ask you, just kind of jumping off on that last slide there. So you described this kind of, there's the bin of Legos end, there's the top-down end, and this is like establishing in the middle. And so you've kind of identified these groups, and there's kind of an ecosystem of these vendors that are involved in the program and developing technology. And we'll talk a little bit further on later in the presentation about some specifics there and how some of those interact with each other. But how would you just sort of, in your own words, describe kind of what that ecosystem of vendors is, what that Blue ecosystem is, and kind of what do those vendors maybe hold in common?
It's a great question. I think one thing I found in common with a lot of these vendors is that they all come from a very high established working prototype or solution or product that's already making a difference in the marketplace. So they already come from a place where they have something that is working and working well technically. And a majority of them come from a place too where they haven't really worked with the government closely before, at least on an official program. So they may have really cool technology, but have been unsure about how to get it into the hands of our users. So Framework has worked with companies because our CSO process, the commercial solutions opening process that we allow for folks to work with us on, is open. We get all kinds of solutions, but I would say if you boil it down, you end up with very highly technical professionals in industry making a difference currently. And what Framework does is serve as a coordination function to have them work together to make a series of solutions that are interoperable, come from, again, trusted supply chains that we can use and make work, as well as help develop standards and help to really, I would say, guide the rest of industry towards something that is useful.
Great. I think that's a good segue. I would love to welcome Ash into the conversation, knowing that Doodle Labs, sponsoring, hosting this webinar was obviously on that list, has been involved in this process from answering the call and developing technology, and we'll get to that story. But yeah, I want to say hi Ash, and welcome to the session. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks a lot for having us, and thanks Matthew and the AVSI team for this. Yeah, just maybe I should mention a little bit of background on myself as well, just right now. So I lead our sales and operations departments at Doodle Labs. I've also been the head of our government programs and been the point person working very closely with Matthew and with DIU on the development of Helix and our overall engagement in the Blue ecosystem. this has been, the things that Matthew just mentioned were actually exactly the reasons why we were very interested in participating. It was really clear what they were looking for was really fit the profile of who we are, where we had a very high functioning product. We have like a pretty large customer base in the commercial industrial sector. And then when Matthew came to us and DIU came to us with this set of requirements and this use case and this opportunity, it really just piqued our interest and it got us pretty excited to join.
Yeah, can you expand on that a little bit further? Doodle Labs, for people who aren't necessarily aware, definitely has a really strong focus on that industrial and commercial use case, and lots of customers and products like actively selling to those markets. What sort of specifically was it about the program and sort of the opportunity to jump in this more defense-oriented space? Like, what did you think that Doodle Labs could bring to the table, and what really tips the scales to say, let's do it and jump in on this type of project?
Yeah, what I would say is we've always done both commercial and government work, but as Matthew even alluded to, we've never been part of a kind of like a lead part of a program. So we had, for example, we had always done work in terms of like development projects as a piece of a prime contractor's project, for example, or product. An example, we in C2 had come to us a couple of years ago saying, hey, they have a fixed wing drone, they want to do some frequency shifting, and we provided those services and a product to them. What was interesting in this particular case was we had a product that was getting traction. Actually, it's this one right here, our embedded radio, which I'll talk a little bit more about this later if it's interesting. But we had this embedded radio, and as Matthew alluded to, it's something that was utilized quite a bit in other use cases. We were also getting a lot of utility from this from large drones. And then this opportunity came here, and the focus really was on smaller Group 1 UAS. And so we said, hey, we already have something that's working quite well. Can we make the modifications needed to make a really great product that fits inside of what this particular use case was looking for? A lot of the ethos that Matthew mentioned in his slides also about needing these products to kind of fit together and be standards-based to a degree and allow things to be interoperable is also essentially our DNA. We've always tried to make things as simple as possible for people to integrate into. So this really just spoke to exactly how we like to operate and how we like to design products.
Yeah, Matthew, I wonder if you could shed some light on kind of, you shared there in your slides very helpfully, just sort of the evolution of sorts of the project. So starting with, especially zeroing in on the framework portion, there was a 1.0, and I gather that was kind of like, we really got to get a call out there because we really just need to generate like a base, like get a starting point to get some technology in the door. And then I believe 2.0 was a lot more pointed, and that's where Doodle Labs was kind of circled in. So how did you, in general, how did DIU pull together the requirements really for each of those 4 areas that you had highlighted, and especially on the data link call, which is what's relevant here today for Doodle Labs? Yeah, how is that sort of pulled together in terms of like what you've determined the requirements should be for putting that call out there and starting to the vetting process?
This is a big part of our job as PMs at DIU. What usually industry sees is the end result of a successful, we call problem curation, which is the first part of our CSO process. Again, CSO is commercial solutions opening. DIU.mil has a great amount of literature on that, so I won't get too deep into it. But before CSO is launched, which the launch is called an area of interest statement, there's a lot of work that goes on, which is coordination, talking, meetings, sync ups. I mean, you name it, where we are hitting up everybody who we would consider stakeholders of SUAS, the DoD, and trying to learn from them and talk to them about what do they need, what are they beholden to, either in process or paperwork, or what are their users telling them. So we aggregate all of these various requirements together, and that becomes what we call our AOI. In the AOI, we try to boil down many different needs into a single document, and it can be quite complicated to do that properly. But what ends up happening is that document gets posted, and that's what serves as the opening for industry to bid on. So if I had to quickly summarize how we get there, it's coordination, it's talking, it's communication, and having, I would say, really strong partnerships across the joint force.
Cool. So like kind of fast forwarding through that process. So you put the AOI out for those different ones, but especially for this data link piece, you're getting responses back. Do you recall, is there anything you can share about, you shared generally that you're looking for those kind of commercial entities that already have kind of some products in place. Was there anything specific you can point out about Doodle Labs just to establish like where this came from in the first place in terms of selecting Doodle Labs to kind of be that vendor?
Sure. I mean, the AOI for Blue UAS Framework 2, which Doodle Labs submitted to, asked for data links. And data link section was super vague. I'm sure Ash remembers how vague it was. And that all resulted from the fact that we needed to have links that have different functions and forms and different usages that we currently didn't have access to. There's a few suppliers commercially, but we also knew that there was sort of a lack of radios that met certain requirements, especially in the federal bands. The DoD has a few bands that we operate in officially. We can operate in others, but those are the ones that we establish as kind of our piece of the spectrum segment. And so what we saw what Doodle Labs is doing, we knew they had the ability to work across frequencies. We said if we could point them in our direction to which ones that we utilize, there's probably a way to get a single radio that can hit every frequency that we operate in the federal band and do so without having to swap hardware. You just simply make a software change, and now you can change which spectrum you're in based on where in the globe you are. And that was an important, first step for our users.
Sorry, I'm muted there. Maybe I'll ask this question to both of you. We can maybe start with Ash, but so go through that process, Doodle Labs is selected, and then the sort of engagement starts, and there's a real collaborative process in actually then kind of following through on developing that technology and making it fit for purpose for that. So Ash, can you kind of describe from the commercial vendor side of the fence, kind of like what that collaborative process was like working on this? To me, that's one of the more interesting elements here is like public-private partnership. And we all can probably pull out examples throughout history here in this country of that not working, but this one seems to be working really well. So I'm interested to hear your perspective kind of on what that process was like working in collaboration with DIU and kind of how that played out.
I will say that it was a surprisingly great experience. And I'm not just blowing smoke because Matthew is on the call here. It was incredibly fast-paced and dynamic, not just compared to typical government processes, but even just compared to the commercial projects that we work on. I mean, I would say, again, now it's a little bit hazy at this point, but I would say it was just a few months from the point of the AOI being released to us submitting a pitch deck to a lot of back and forth and discussions and brainstorming about the solution that we put together. Matthew just alluded to it, that it was a very vague AOI. And so the beauty of that, though, is that from our side, we kind of took it as an opportunity to try and say, hey, here's what's all the things that we could be doing. And then working with them was a great process of saying, this is important, this is not important. They pushed us a little bit more in certain areas. And it was an awesome process. And again, I'm not just saying that because we're on this webinar. It was a very unique, very fast-paced process going through it, and including even the contracting piece was extremely efficient. So I mean, overall, and what we'll talk about when I give you guys a little bit more overview of like what the development actually was, you'll see that it's actually led to some pretty foundational shifts and moves forward, new technologies that we've integrated built into this radio that are going to be carried forward. It didn't just serve the current need. I think this platform now can be used, quite a bit going forward.
Yeah, Matthew, how, from your perspective, kind of like headed into that process of that collaboration, kind of what were your expectations, knowing that you both acknowledged that it was fairly vague in terms of the initial call out, but how did it play out, as compared to your expectations, and what was your experience on your side of things?
I would ditto Ash. I think it was great working with them as a company, and really every company we work with in their framework have been incredible to work with. One thing that's different that Ash doesn't see that we do as the government is, we're in the background, we're playing playing chess, right? We are moving pieces around where they got to go. And one of the big benefits of Framework is not just creating awesome capabilities that Ash alluded to with the Helix and others. It's the interoperability and the connection between those. That is really what we find to be incredibly powerful. Is not just one single piece of, you know, new radio, new camera, new whatever, but really when you have these pieces and we put tasks on contract to make the companies make them work on certain platforms. Now as a user or developer, you have a suite of things that works together natively, and all that kind of integration step and all that time and money you spend trying to get something to work for the first time, we've already done it, right? The companies have already done that. And so now you can go use, you know, buy, use, and add your special sauce, add the thing that makes your system unique on top of that, whether that's software or some new sensor that you created or whatever it is. Now you've got a set of components that are all built individually, tested together, and proven compliant by the DoD. So we're hoping to get people from zero to flight in a secure way, you know, much faster. That's really the intention. But I think working with Ash has been incredible. He's a very professional business director at Doodle Labs. The whole company has been very great to work with, technically proficient, able to deliver everything on time. So, you know, no hesitation, just as expected, commercial industry comes through.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And because I work for Doodle Labs, so that's obviously awesome to hear. But I think the special sauce you referred to, I think that's what we really want to touch on for this presentation. So I know Ash has pulled together some slides that kind of go through the development process really, and pulls out those actual requirements that you kind of collaboratively landed on that they needed to hit. But the special sauce is really, I think, the above and beyond. And there's a few examples of that here. So I would love for Ash to kind of share that view of that project, but we'll continue the conversation around, the cooler things that popped out of it and how that kind of is going to, continue to have an impact within the DoD, but really on the drone industry as a whole. So I can pass it over to Ash for that portion.
Okay, cool. And I'm going to share with the not just to talk about Helix, but I'm going to try and do this in the context of giving an overview of what it was like to develop through this process, from what the requirements were that were given to us in their vagueness, but is essentially what we was given to us and what the collaboration process was like. And we'll even touch upon the collaboration between the other vendors, which is again, as Matthew said, like a big part of what makes this really interesting. There were essentially 6 big requirement areas. The first was there need to be multiple frequency bands. To make a system be approved for use globally, there are always different frequency bands that are approved in different geographies, and it's a huge operational pain point. Having to swap out a radio or not have the authority to ship a system to a certain or use a system at a certain place. So that was number 1. Number 2, we had to reduce the size. We were targeting small drones, and so the smaller the better. Just leads to knock-on effects in terms of the overall utility of the platform. 3, range. Obviously, these are drones. The distance is important. 4, the security of the data that's being transmitted, super important. And this is a big part of the reason why the ban on Chinese drones came in the first place. Number 5, for the reason that Matthew mentioned earlier, had to be standards-based in order to plug into the rest of the ecosystem. And 6, there was a number of tasks about integrating with other vendors. So I'll talk a little bit more and kind of give a couple examples of what those were like and what the development there was about. So the 6 frequency bands that were given to us, they ranged from M1 to M6, which was 1.6 gigahertz to 2.5 gigahertz. And these 6 frequency bands, if a single radio could operate on those bands, then you wouldn't have to swap a radio in and out. This was a very unique challenge because most radios out there, including ours, are single band radios. And this was our existing embedded radio at the time, a single band radio. So we had versions of this that actually covered each of those single frequencies, but not a single radio with all those bands in one. So, talking about the back and forth and the brainstorming together process, we initially, I think we initially had proposed 2 or maybe 3 different radios that would then cover this. So essentially like two bands or 3 bands per radio. And in those few weeks of collaborating and working together, our team had also been working quite actively in the background, brainstorming, saying, what can we do? How can we build this into a single thing? And there was a eureka moment at our on our team side about a multi-band technology that would allow us to actually serve all of these 6 different bands in a single radio without increasing swap. I mean, that was essentially the incoming risk of, we wanted to add frequencies and reduce size at the same time, which normally are kind of orthogonal. The really cool thing about this technology also is that we view this as a way into the future also, where if future government requirements come in with different frequencies, let's say they want to mix and match different types of frequencies, this same technology that was developed as part of this project can be used for that. So you can almost think of these as like slots, so you can replace this slot with a different frequency band. So let's say a customer comes to us, which they already have, about like they need C-band functionality. We can then replace that path or that slot with a different frequency band like C-band. So this is like a really cool function. This also, just to talk even about our commercial, how this relays over to commercial, we're also now able to put in commercial frequency bands in these different slots as well. And so a lot of vendors that are both commercial and government focused, they're able to leverage this. The second was size and weight and power reduction. So this was an interesting challenge. This, as you can see right here, was our embedded radio. And this is where we got it down to our mini OEM, which we call right here. And so this was already, from a volume perspective and a weight perspective, I think we were actually able to reduce it down by about 55%. What's cool about this also is that this thing you're seeing here, we designed it so that, if certain chassis have even smaller swap requirements, they can even separate these boards and kind of place them separately wherever they need to. So this thing right here covers all of the 6 bands that I mentioned in the previous slide. Then there was a follow-on requirement saying, hey, it's cool that you guys got this smaller. Can you make it even smaller? Like we have, an additional drones. We want to, be able to utilize what you guys are putting into even smaller places. And so that's when we came out with this Nano, which we just wrapped up development on a couple months ago. And so with the difference between these 2 things is this is like a 2x2 MIMO, so 2 data streams, and then this one is a single data stream. But a lot of people are using these in conjunction. So for example, you use the 2x2 on the ground side where you have less of a swap requirement, and then this on your drone and the flyer. So you can kind of see the evolution between those. And then range. So what was Matthew mentioned, like a lot of the requirements that were given as part of this AUI was from the SRR program, but it wasn't limited to that. The reason it was kept vague was because the scope and the thought process was broader than that. So although we were focused on the short range reconnaissance program at the time, like their distance requirement was, quite modest from what our radios were doing. I mean, this guy right here, we have customers that were doing telemetry at 100+ kilometers for fixed wing flyers. And so the range wasn't that of an issue for us in this particular case. We even have drones that are doing like 20+ kilometers streaming HD video using our mini OEMs. And so even now, I think it was interesting. Just last week, we got some really cool information from one of the vendors from Teal that they just duct taped, like a very fast duct tape experiment. They just threw these on a drone and very basic antennas just to see what would happen, and they're getting 9 kilometers using this combination of the mini OEM and the Nano right here. So number 4 was was encryption. And again, the AOI was fairly vague about it. I think it referenced, if I'm not mistaken, like 256-bit AES, which our radios already had at the time. So then we use the opportunity to think, okay, what can we do what else can we bring forward here? And how can we kind of future-proof this radio? And the FIPS 140-3 standard was released a couple years ago, and essentially, I think it was last year that it now, they began sunsetting the FIPS 140-2 standard, and FIPS 140-3 is the new standard going forward. And so even though it wasn't on the AUI, we brought that forward saying, hey, we have ideas of how we can design this into the radio. And then now looking forward, any government customer that's looking for this level of security can know that they can kind of like rest assured that this can be used in their system. So the radio itself is now, it has this baked in, it's compliant, and it's still sitting with NIST for them to get around to actually providing the certification for it. And number 5 was about standards and interoperability. So this was, again, a reason why we were really drawn to this project. We already, this is like how we already built our products. So we are a Qualcomm partner. We build all of our radios on Qualcomm 802.11 chipsets. And therefore, all the things that we do, we use standard interfaces. We use the operating system is a Linux-based operating system. So we build all of our features and capabilities on top of that. And we expose a lot of that to our partners. And so this, we'll get into what we're about to speak to, is other vendors and integrators that are using this radio that can kind of really do very, very deep integrations. It's more than just, passing packets through a radio. You can now start doing intelligent things, have the radio or the drone operate and communicate in various different modes and different manners, depending on the use case in the situation. So a couple examples to point, and Matthew, by the way, please feel free to jump in. I should have mentioned that earlier. You also have, as you mentioned, you have a lot of background and maybe behind the scenes context for what's going on. So working with Modal AI has been fantastic. They provide the flight controller. It's a really powerful compute platform, and you can build all sorts of AI onto it. So working with them was really cool because our radios from the very get-go, they're now kind of like just very plug and play. You can, the libraries are built in. So now literally when you plug them in, they just kind of go immediately. Actually, I hope you guys can see can you guys see the animation? Although it's not critical, but hopefully I clicked it. In any case, yeah, I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but yeah, in any case. So working with them has been awesome, and we're continuing to work with them. So now, they're even selling evaluation kits that use our radios and vice versa. And we still have a lot on the roadmap that we're brainstorming together of the different types of things that our radios can do. We're also in our future radio development, we're also talking quite a bit about even closer integrations between the two, given that we're both Qualcomm partners and building on similar chipsets. Anything you want to add there, Matthew, before I give a couple more examples?
That's pretty clear, actually. Great job.
Okay. I also want to give a couple examples of where, now that this radio has already been built, different projects and systems that government programs that are now leveraging this. And the first and clearest example is the Soldier Robotic Controller program, which is commonly known as SROC. So the program here is we're looking for a controller that doesn't need to be rebuilt for every single robot or drone system that comes out there. We want to have a single thing that then can be, if you have a different communications module or a different piece of software, you can just leverage the same piece of technology and plug and play the different pieces as needed. So on the back of, two of the partners here are Vantage Robotics and Aterion and UXV Technologies. So what you're seeing here is the controller, And this right here is the SRM module, which is the communications module for it, which can be swapped out very easily. So here is actually a physical version of it right here. You can see this right here. And so it can clip right into the controller, and it also, people are also building these types of clips so that it can be also be clipped onto you know, a soldier's vest or pocket. Anything you want to add to this one also as well, Matthew?
No, not at all. I mean, I think it does show a bit on how a lot of our projects do work together. You know, you can see framework now feeding into another one of our Foundry efforts. It's called Soldier Robotic Controller. So it's one more example of, you know, these efforts not living in silos or individually, but really forming this this underlying framework for technologies to allow us to build on top of. And that really is one of the big goals of this effort, is to provide components that can be used across all of our programs and other DoD programs as they become necessary or relevant.
And this is an area that I know, Matt, we're all quite interested in, including Matthew. Like, this was not part of the initial AOI. It was explicitly not part of the AOI, but we would always have discussions in the background about, you know, oh, wait, the radio already has mesh capability. So even though it's not part of this right here, this is something we can look forward to in the future. The AOI, the use case for the AOI is just point to point. You know, it's a single ground controller to a single drone. But there are all sorts of use cases, you know, when it comes to when you don't have line of sight to the drone, using another drone as a relay node, or having a drone broadcast to a variety of different ground users, as well as we're thinking about, you know, full swarming use cases where you have a number of drones that are fully it's a fully ad hoc network, and they're all moving around in very rapid ability. So the radios, again, this is one of the things that we already had from a lot of our industrial and commercial work. We already had these mesh capabilities in here, and now we're continuing to build on top of that using the government's variety of use cases as they're bringing them forward. What's cool now is another example is of how we're collaborating is now those types of capabilities are now being pulled in to, for example, QGC Gov. So QGC Gov is a mission control. It has a GUI where the end user can be is visualizing and using the system. And so things, our radio has an API where now all of these types of data and the ways to control the radio can be built into an application. Again, it's not just like a, you know, sending packets back and forth. So Terra has been doing some fantastic work here where they're taking all of that capability and they're now exposing those types of controls to the end user. For example, now you can now start, if you do have multiple drones or multiple ground users, a mesh being used, you can start visualizing the users or the drones. You can start seeing what the distances are. You can start seeing their positioning data. You can start seeing what the link strengths are. So you have a good idea of, you know, how your network is what the health of your network is. You're also able to, you know, before and when you're flying your device, you can do a spectrum scan to see, you know, there's a lot of spectrum available for this radio to operate on now between 1.6 and 2.5 gigahertz. Do a scan about, you know, what is the best band that I should be flying at? What's the cleanest out there? And so the user can do that spectrum scan directly from the GUI, and they can then switch channels based on that information about whichever the cleanest is. Again, these are things that typically are built, you know, on the back end. You typically do this on your bench. You don't necessarily change these types of things in real time historically. But now with these modern use cases and these very dynamic use cases, you want to start empowering the users to be able to do these types of things on the fly. And so these are cool things that, you know, by us partnering together, we're now able to start bringing. So I think those were the 6. Anything else you guys want me to touch on? But hopefully that gave you guys an idea of, you know, what it was like to take these types of requirements, how we worked together and kind of built on top of that.
Yeah, I think I would love to actually ask a question of Matthew for this one. Are you surprised? So you stated obviously, so you know, the AI, at least for this data link one, was quite big, and so you know, it started out as just like requirements, send a call out, see who comes back, and is kind of willing to develop these things. But now, you know, the whole theme of this thing is innovation, right? So we've we touched on the multi-band technology, right? Like having all of 6 bands in one radio, that didn't exist before. That was novel. We have all these great integrations. Some of these are pretty organic in terms of just like picking up between, oh, you're a blue vendor, we're a blue vendor, let's talk and like see what we can do together. Are you surprised by sort of like the type and volume of these innovations and collaboration that's kind of been born out of this? I know it was a goal to begin with, but how does that kind of align with what you expect, Matthew?
Yeah, I think one thing that has been surprising to me, you know, a lot of these have been developed for purposes that have a role in one of the programs mentioned before. But what is surprising to me and what I really enjoy about working with Framework is that, you know, these are just seeds that are planted and that we watch the results sprout up in places that we didn't expect. That really is probably the best part of working on Framework, is that these are not just military capabilities. These also can be used for state and local and sometimes enterprise use cases. Now it depends upon the technology, but there's the dual use of our technologies is super important. And so that's what really, I think, is the best part of this and surprising, is seeing where they pop up. I knew they would pop up in other places, but seeing when they do crop up and you go, oh, you know what, that radio, that camera, that software that came out of Framework and that's being used, that has no idea where the origin was. I do enjoy that quite a bit.
Yeah,
if I could just build on that, you know, it's been very helpful and a surprise for us as well, that we kind of like went into this knowing that, you know, like I mentioned here, you know, we started with something that was, you know, for like fixed, you know, larger drones. We went into it knowing that, hey, this will, working on this particular project will give us a really good solution for smaller drones and for government drones. What's been a really cool thing is that partnering with these different players in the ecosystem who also have an enterprise and commercial business line and set of customers, we're now collaborating in ways that I don't think we would have collaborated if we weren't all part of the ecosystem. So, you know, for example, we're working with Auterion. Now you saw the ways that we're working with them here on the Gov side. We now have relationships and we're building products for enterprise and commercial, which is fantastic, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to take this opportunity. We're getting a ton of questions. So just as a prompt to the audience, there's no way we're going to get to all of these during our session. So we'll definitely follow up offline and try to help answer those, which is great. Thanks for participation. The commercial space actually cropped up quite a bit. And there's kind of like 2 angles to this that have come up a couple of separate times. So I think, Ash, maybe you just alluded to it, but I think, how does this kind of like apply to the commercial side? I think from my perspective, all else aside, I think people do look to programs like this, and there is a pretty high bar in terms of like standards and specs that these projects need to meet. And so I think in some ways, if there is that dual use, as Matthew mentioned, like people trust they're starting to really trust even more so the Blue and the DIU logos that are kind of slapped on those projects or are associated there. Can you talk just a little bit more about the interoperability and how the things that have been born of this project would extend to the commercial space, Ash?
Yeah, I think you actually just mentioned it yourself. So one is that Blue does have like a stamp of approval, number one. And number two, they have done a great job vetting the vendors that they're working with and the partners they're working with. And so now that we're collaborating with them, we feel like we're working with really great partners. And the solutions that we're putting together are, you know, it's not just, you know, any other vendor out there. Like people are, you know, have real businesses that they're doing real things and they have real technology. And then two, I in our multi-band technology like that, we had initially designed for meeting this government requirement of these, you know, having L-band operation. And now we can leverage that same technology, and we're doing that. We're releasing a commercial version just in a couple of weeks that has 900 megahertz and 2.4 megahertz on the same radio. So commercial companies now also are getting to benefit from the same technology that was developed.
Yeah, Matthew, I think just like a glance at the people attending this, at least the live event here, is there's a strong, obviously, military presence, but there is a mix of commercial vendors too. There was some questions, I think, around, so obviously people on the commercial side are paying attention to Blue. There were some questions kind of around potential writing on the wall. So a lot of the changes in terms of oversight and policy came really fast and loose. Like once the DJI story kind of broke in terms of data security concerns, there's some questions popping up around non-DoD entities, but like like police forces and other such things, and even just in the commercial space. Is there any conversation, I guess, on that side about this expanding outside of just that kind of like military field of battle, or like do you think about that at all, I guess, in terms of the future?
Yeah, we don't just think about it, we live it. I mean, one of the other consequences of Blue was that while we're doing things for the DoD, we found other agencies, DHS, DOJ, specifically, as well as state and local, say whatever the DoD is doing, we're going to do. And we're looking at them saying, you don't have to, there's no need to. I mean, we have, like, our budget is tied to a bunch of rules we've got to follow. You don't have that. So you could go off and do whatever you'd like. But a lot of folks have just voluntarily signed up to say, whatever you're doing, we want to do too. So we've taken on, I guess, a bit of extra burden as a result of that. We're happy to do so, but we also know that some agencies aren't quite tied to the same rules the DoD are tied to. So it's a consequence of what we did. Is it showed there's maybe a coordination function that could be used, and for those that we do support, again, many federal government agencies, DHS, DOJ specifically, have been great partners of ours. We've worked with them on some of our projects, and we've shared testing events and coordination, and we're closely tied in with them. So it's been a great collaboration, in my opinion.
Great. Yeah. Another theme that I'm just seeing in the questions and in various kind of like angles to it is just how can people get involved? And this is for you, Matthew. I think people are wondering, there was the 1.0, 2.0. What is the kind of future forecast for specifically for the framework, and just questions really on how some have said they're specifically drone manufacturers, especially made in the US. One, I've seen other people maybe do components as well. But yeah, what's the outlook for expanding and continuing to welcome more people in?
And we see a lot of questions on this. I would say one of the confusing points is that this is not rolling admissions, right? This is not, you just enter a process and you're in. It's sort of like when you sign up for health insurance from your employer. Like there's a open enrollment period, you've got to hit that period, and then we work with you post that. And so that open enrollment period is called our area of interest statement, AOI. That is always driven by the DoD. We don't let companies submit whenever. They submit during an active AOI. If you go to diu.mil, you'll see AOIs that are live. I can tell you we don't have any for Blue UAS currently. But when there are ways to do like a web form on there, so you get notified by our email server whenever you get a new AOI that goes live. So we also have a LinkedIn page, and I believe we're on Twitter as well. So there's different ways you can kind of follow along. And when we post stuff, it will say, "Yeah, you're supposed to do AOI. Come sign up." So I would say best thing to do is just watch for those AOIs, and when you do, be ready to submit something that is well fleshed out. I'd say every successful project that we have has come from a place of having already established traction in the marketplace beforehand. So one of the best things you can do for yourself is really have a story, product, prototype, value add to somebody that we can piggyback on top of. The projects that don't really go well are the ones where a vendor says, "We'll build whatever you want. What do you want?" And we go, we aren't looking for that. What do you do well? Okay, we'll take that and modify it. Innovation for us really is adaptation, not invention.
Yeah, that's great. I would also just take the moment to just encourage people to keep track, obviously, at both Doodle Labs and DIU. We're both obviously on websites, doodlelabs.com on our side. Reach out to us if you have any questions about anything we've covered off. diu.mil /blue-UAS is a really great resource. There's a lot of information there that we've covered off, and a lot more as well, just about working with the program. I wanted to take, we're running out of time here, and I want to make sure we've gotten a ton of questions. We will answer all of those offline, the ones that we haven't been able to address here. But I wanted to give one more chance to each of you to kind of like chime in on your viewpoint of kind of what's the future looking like in terms of drones, especially within this government space, but just in general in terms of innovating new technology. Matt, maybe you can lead off on that one.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, the point I would make very clear is that none of this happens without having dedicated, competent, successful commercial partners. So for those out there who are making products and for bringing your ideas into the marketplace, keep doing that, do more of it. We know it's challenging. None of this comes easy, but without having a competent talent and supply chain, we couldn't do any of this. So that's the piece I would leave forward with, really, is, go off, be successful. When the time comes, we'd love to work with you.
Excellent. Same question to you, Ash.
I mean, looking forward, we're really excited about where the drone industry in general is going. And I think even beyond the drone industry, where even just ground robotics and, connectivity is going, we were really grateful for this program because it got us focused on a set of requirements, and it brought our company, our development team together on this particular project, which now is, has a lot of benefits beyond just that one particular use case that we were designing for. The radio can now be used in, extremely long range things, larger drones, ground robots. You saw examples of how it's being used now in handheld use cases as well. So we're seeing now that we have something that touches on all those different places, how much activity is happening in all of those different types of sectors. And the technology that we've built now, it has both like a government as well as a commercial use case with our multi-band capability. So it's now kind of like a foundational piece of where we're going forward. So we're super excited, and we were very happy to be part of this program.
Excellent. Speak for all of us to say we're really excited to see where both groups are going and continued collaboration and what comes of it. So yeah, thanks both of you for joining the session. Obviously, thanks everyone for attending. Happy to pass it back over to AAVSI just to wrap things up.
Well, great, thank you. I like to echo those sentiments on behalf of AAVSI. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Ash. Thanks, Nate, for this great presentation and excellent discussion. I know we didn't get to quite answer all of the questions that came in, but like Nate said, they'll be able to follow up with you separately and off.